Welcome, everyone. In today's session, we are going to explore the idea of cultural clusters through the lens of the GLOBE Project. The GLOBE Project is one of the most influential international research programs that studied leadership and culture across more than 60 societies. Instead of looking at countries one by one, it groups them into clusters of cultures that share common roots and characteristics. By doing this, we can see not just how nations differ, but also how groups of nations have grown out of shared histories, languages, religions, and social systems. These clusters help us understand why leadership and organizational practices that succeed in one part of the world may not work the same way in another. Our goal today is to gain a clearer picture of these cultural clusters, so that we can better understand our diverse world and the challenges of working across cultures. On this slide, we can see the world map divided into the 10 cultural clusters defined by the GLOBE Project. It is important to note that countries are not grouped only by geography, but by shared cultural patterns such as language, religion, history, colonial background, legal systems, and models of social development. That's why, for example, Israel, although located in the Middle East, is classified in the Latin Europe cluster. Now let's look at the map. The Anglo cluster, in light green, includes the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and white South Africans in South Africa. The Latin America cluster, in light blue, covers Mexico, Central America, and South America, such as Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, and Chile. The Germanic Europe cluster, in purple, includes Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, and the German-speaking part of Switzerland. The Nordic Europe cluster, in dark green, consists of Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. The Latin Europe cluster, in orange, brings together France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Switzerland, French and Italian parts, and also Israel. The Eastern Europe cluster, in blue, includes Russia, Poland, Hungary, Greece, Slovenia, Georgia, and Kazakhstan. The Confucian Asia cluster, in dark blue, covers China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Japan, and South Korea. The Southern Asia cluster, in pink, includes India, Thailand, Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Iran. The Middle East cluster, in light purple, includes Turkey, Egypt, Kuwait, Qatar, and Morocco. And finally, the Sub-Saharan Africa cluster, in red, includes countries such as Nigeria, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Black South Africans. So, as you can see, these colors on the map represent cultural regions that share common traditions and values. This clustering helps us understand why leadership, organizations, and management styles often vary significantly across regions of the world. In the GLOBE Project, the Confucian Asia cluster is defined not simply by geography, but more importantly by shared cultural and social foundations. First, let us consider language and script. The countries in this cluster share a historical connection to the Chinese writing system, Hanzi. This script was adopted and adapted into kanji in Japan, Hanja in Korea, and was widely used for centuries in Vietnam. Having a common written tradition enabled the spread of philosophy, governance models, and scholarship throughout the region. Next, we turn to the historical legacy. The societies in Confucian Asia have a long tradition of centralized bureaucratic states, with China as the cultural core. Systems of governance and civil service examinations based on Confucian classics deeply influenced Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, establishing the foundation for states and societies that place great emphasis on learning and merit. Third, we must mention religion and philosophy. Confucianism, originating in China, stresses hierarchy, filial piety, social harmony, and respect for education. Combined with elements of Buddhism and Taoism, it created a set of common values: discipline, harmony, and collective responsibility. Finally, there is the socio-economic model. In these societies, education is regarded as the main pathway to upward mobility and national development. Collectivism is emphasized. Loyalty to family, organization, and society comes before individual interests. After World War II, these shared values enabled the region to enter a period of rapid industrialization with strong state-led strategies: Japan's economic miracle, South Korea's chaebol system, China's reforms and opening up, and Singapore's developmental state. In summary, the Confucian Asia cluster is bound together by its written tradition, by Confucian values, by the legacy of centralized bureaucracy, and by a socio-economic model that prizes education, discipline, and long-term development. These cultural foundations help explain why East Asian nations have been able to sustain remarkable growth and stability throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. In the Southern Asia cluster, which includes countries such as India, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Iran, we see a remarkable diversity in culture and society. First, let's consider language. The region is highly diverse, with major language families including Indo-European, Austronesian, and Iranian languages. This linguistic variety reflects the long history of interactions and exchanges across South and Southeast Asia. Second, religion plays a central role. Hinduism, Islam, and Buddhism are the dominant traditions, and each has deeply shaped the values, customs, and social practices of these societies. Third, in terms of history, these countries were strongly influenced by Indian, Islamic, and Buddhist civilizations. Later, they experienced colonial rule under Britain, the Netherlands, and Spain, which left lasting legacies on their political, legal, and economic systems. Now let us move to the socio-economic model of the region. Southern Asia is characterized by strong state involvement in economic development, large populations that support labor-intensive industries, and a continuing influence of colonial legacies on their economies. Business and economic activities are often embedded in family and community networks, showing how social ties remain crucial in shaping economic behavior. At the same time, despite rapid growth and increasing urbanization, the region still faces significant challenges, including high inequality and a large informal labor sector. These issues remind us that development here is dynamic and impressive, but also uneven and complex. In short, the Southern Asia cluster is defined by its cultural diversity, strong traditions, and unique path of development, where both history and community continue to play a central role in shaping society today. Now let us look at the Anglo cluster, which consists of the United Kingdom, the United States, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Ireland, and the white population in South Africa. The first common foundation here is language. All of these countries share English as the dominant language, belonging to the Germanic language family. This linguistic unity is one of the strongest markers of the Anglo world and helps explain their shared communication style and cultural outlook. Second, we need to consider history. These countries were all shaped by the legacy of the British Empire. They inherited political institutions, administrative practices, and especially the common law legal system, which emphasizes case precedents and judicial reasoning. This historical continuity created a foundation of governance and rule of law that still defines the Anglo cluster today. Third, let us turn to religion. While the religious composition varies, the cultural values are deeply rooted in the Protestant tradition. In the United Kingdom, Anglicanism is the established church, whereas in the United States the influence of Calvinist Protestantism is particularly strong. Both emphasize individual responsibility, discipline, and the value of hard work, what Max Weber famously described as the Protestant ethic. These religious roots have played a significant role in shaping the Anglo world's emphasis on self-reliance, personal achievement, and moral responsibility in work and life. Finally, we look at the cultural characteristics that emerge from these shared foundations. The Anglo cluster is marked by high individualism, where people are encouraged to be independent and self-sufficient. It also shows a strong performance orientation, meaning that success is measured by results and achievements. And there is a high degree of competitiveness, both in business and in society, where striving for excellence and standing out as an individual are strongly valued. In summary, the Anglo cluster reflects the influence of a common language, the British colonial legacy, Protestant traditions, and a strong orientation toward individualism and performance. This helps us understand why leadership and organizational practices in the Anglo world are often centered on personal initiative, merit-based success, and competitive achievement. Now let us move on to the Germanic Europe cluster, which includes Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, and the German-speaking part of Switzerland. The first foundation is language. These countries share Germanic languages such as German and Dutch. Language here is not just a means of communication, but also reflects a logical and structured way of thinking, which has shaped their cultural and organizational practices. Second, in terms of history and thought, the region was strongly influenced by the Protestant Reformation, which promoted discipline, responsibility, and a strong work ethic. It also gave rise to a tradition of rationalist philosophy, with thinkers such as Leibniz, Kant, and Hegel, who emphasized reason, order, and systematic planning. In addition, these countries were among the first in Europe to industrialize, which left a lasting imprint on their economies and societies. Third, regarding religion, the majority of the population historically followed Protestantism, both Lutheran and Calvinist traditions, though Catholic communities remain significant in Austria and parts of Switzerland. These religious traditions supported values of hard work, frugality, and personal responsibility. As for cultural traits, the Germanic Europe cluster is characterized by discipline, efficiency, long-term planning, and a strong tendency to avoid uncertainty. In practice, this means societies in this region value clear rules, careful preparation, and stable institutions. Finally, we must look at the socio-economic model. These countries developed what is known as the social market economy, which combines free market principles with strong welfare systems. Labor relations are based on co-determination, meaning that workers have a voice in company decision-making. Economically, the region is renowned for its advanced manufacturing and engineering industries, as well as strong financial sectors, particularly in Switzerland and the Netherlands. A culture of saving and reinvestment has provided stability and resources for long-term development. In summary, the Germanic Europe cluster reflects the combination of Protestant work ethic, rationalist philosophy, and early industrialization, which together produced a disciplined, efficient, and well-organized society. This unique blend explains why the region has been so successful in building both strong economies and stable social systems. Now let us turn to the Latin Europe cluster, which includes France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, the French-speaking regions of Switzerland, and also Israel. The first common feature here is language. Most of these countries speak Romance languages, which are derived from Latin and represent a strong cultural link to the Roman Empire. Language plays a central role in shaping communication styles, traditions, and shared identity across this region. Second, in terms of history, the countries of Latin Europe carry the strong legacy of the Roman Empire and the Catholic Church. Their political and legal systems are built on the civil law tradition, especially the Napoleonic Code, which emphasizes codified rules and written statutes rather than case precedent. This legal framework continues to influence governance and administration across the region today. Third, we need to mention Israel, which may seem unusual at first glance because of its geography. However, Israel is included in this cluster because of its historical ties with Jewish communities from southern and western Europe, and because its legal and administrative systems are modeled closely on European civil law traditions. Moreover, its cultural values, such as high uncertainty avoidance, a strong performance orientation, and a clear acceptance of hierarchy, make it much closer to Latin Europe than to the Middle East cluster. Now let us examine the socio-economic traits of the Latin Europe cluster. Societies here tend to have clear hierarchies and strong power distance, where authority is respected and organizations are more centralized. At the same time, there is a strong emphasis on personal relationships and trust networks. Knowing the right people and building long-term connections are often as important as formal rules. Economically, this region combines modern industries and service sectors with traditional family-owned businesses, which continue to play an important role in the economy. The state also plays a strong role in regulating markets and steering economic development, particularly in countries such as France and Italy. Finally, social welfare systems exist, but they are less universal and comprehensive compared to Northern Europe, with greater variation between countries. In summary, the Latin Europe cluster reflects the shared heritage of the Roman Empire, Catholic traditions, and civil law institutions. It is characterized by Romance languages, hierarchical structures, relationship-based business practices, and a socio-economic model that balances state involvement with private enterprise. Understanding this cluster helps us see why leadership and management in Latin Europe often emphasize authority, stability, and personal connections alongside modern economic strategies. Now let us look at the Nordic Europe cluster, which includes Denmark, Sweden, Finland in the GLOBE project. The first foundation here is language. These countries speak North Germanic or Scandinavian languages, which connect them culturally and historically, and reflect their shared identity in Northern Europe. Second, in terms of history, the region has deep roots going back to the Viking era, which fostered a spirit of exploration, seafaring, and early forms of community decision-making through local assemblies. Later, these countries developed strong democratic traditions. But most importantly, after the Second World War, they built what we now call the universal welfare state, a social system that combines democracy with extensive public services and a strong emphasis on equality. Third, in terms of religion, the cultural foundation is mainly Lutheran Protestantism, which stressed community responsibility, modesty, and discipline. This religious background supported the idea that society as a whole should take care of all its members, reinforcing collective welfare as a shared value. When we look at the cultural traits, the Nordic cluster is known for its high gender equality, strong social welfare systems, political consensus, and low power distance. Authority is relatively flat, decisions are often made through dialogue and negotiation, and citizens tend to trust their governments and institutions. Finally, the socio-economic model is highly distinctive. The Nordic countries operate under a universal welfare system, funded by high taxes but providing citizens with extensive public services such as free education, healthcare, and social security. Labor unions play a powerful role, and social dialogue between employers, workers, and the state ensures balance and stability. Economically, the region is advanced in manufacturing, high technology, and renewable energy, reflecting long-term investment and innovation. At the same time, cultural values emphasize equality, trust, and social cohesion, which support both social stability and economic competitiveness. In summary, the Nordic Europe cluster is shaped by Viking heritage, democratic traditions, Lutheran values, and the universal welfare state. It stands out for its unique combination of equality, social trust, and strong economic performance, making it one of the most cohesive and successful models in the world today. Now let us turn to the Middle East cluster, which is comprised of Qatar, Egypt, Morocco, Turkey, and Kuwait. The first unifying factor is language. Arabic is the dominant language across most of the region, while Turkish is central in Turkey. Language reflects both shared identity and deep historical ties across the Arab and Islamic world. Second, the religious foundation of the cluster is overwhelmingly Islam, which plays a central role in shaping values, laws, and daily life. Religious traditions influence social roles, family structures, and even business practices. In many countries, Islamic values emphasize hospitality, respect for elders, and community solidarity. Historically, this region carries the legacy of the Arab and Ottoman empires, which provided a long history of centralized authority and cultural exchange. In more recent centuries, colonial encounters with Britain and France also left strong political and institutional influences, particularly in North Africa and the Levant. When we look at the cultural traits, the Middle East cluster is marked by high power distance, with strong hierarchical structures where authority is respected. It is also strongly collectivist. Loyalty to family, tribe, and community is considered more important than individual interests. Honor, tradition, and hospitality are highly valued, while gender egalitarianism remains relatively low compared to Western societies, though this is gradually changing in some countries. Finally, let us examine the socio-economic model. Many economies in the Middle East depend heavily on oil and gas resources, especially in the Gulf states such as Qatar and Kuwait. These resource-rich countries can provide generous welfare benefits to their citizens. At the same time, countries like Egypt and Morocco rely more on agriculture, services, and informal economies, and face challenges such as unemployment and inequality. Across the region, the state plays a strong role in economic planning and development, and family and kinship networks continue to be important in business relations. In summary, the Middle East cluster combines a shared Islamic heritage, hierarchical social structures, and resource-driven economies. Leadership and management in this region often emphasize authority, loyalty to family and group, and the importance of tradition and honor in guiding social and economic life. So, we have explored some cultural clusters identified by the Globe Project. From Anglo and Germanic Europe to Latin, Nordic, Confucian Asia, Southern Asia, and the Middle East, each cluster reflects unique historical, linguistic, religious, and socio-economic foundations. Understanding these clusters helps us recognize why leadership and management styles vary across regions.